shoreline stabilization, they need to come in and get a planning board permit. It needs to go under review. And along with that, they need to provide a revegetation plan if they're going to remove any vegetation during the process. Now, if you have a lot of trees and you can remove some and still be in compliance with the point system, then so be it, you're good to go. But a lot of times that isn't how it works, and leads to some excessive cutting. Like you can see, you know, the left-hand picture is, it's just lawn right down, kind of a vertical wall, not even really a riprap on a 2-to-1 slope deal. Whereas the one on the right, you can see it comes up nice, and right at the top of it, they've got erosion control mulch, and that's a big thing for people reviewing permits to be aware of as well. If someone just puts mulch on a permit, you may want to tease that out a little bit. Is it bark mulch, wood chips, or erosion control mulch? Erosion control mulch is made of stump grindings, grit, flume grit, deteriorating wood. Basically, when water gets on it, it stays put. And when I'm advising citizens, when they're taking on a job like this, I tell them to go to the supplier, bring a 5-gallon bucket. Everybody's got a spigot on the outside of their building these days. Put some water in your bucket, fill it halfway up, go over to the pile that they want to sell you erosion control mulch out of, grab a couple handfuls, throw it in the bucket. If more than 50% of it floats, it's probably not the product you want people using, because it's just going to float off and be out into the resource and it's not going to do anything. And they really don't understand that either. I guess I should look into it a little bit more, why stumps don't float and trees that are above ground do. But that's just how it works. So another thing that towns can do, and it says if feasible, and it's an economic thing that you got to be looking at. A lot of people used to do their riprap and shoreline stabilization off a barge. You know, they'd bring in a barge, there'd be an excavator on it, they'd have their rock right on it, and they would load from the barge, and they wouldn't have to impact the top of the shoreline at all. And it was really effective way for shoreline stabilization, because you don't have to go back in after the excavator's been up there digging up your yard and doing all that stuff and have to do all that extra work. Now, I would think the cost would be a little bit more to get it done off a barge, because there's not a lot of companies out there doing barge work like that. But it's a cost-benefit analysis type of thing. You know, how much does it cost to have someone dig up your yard, take down your trees, to have that all replanted, versus come in on a barge and not deal with any of the topside stuff. But that's my college education, is resource economics and environmental policy, so it's heavy in the economics, and I came from the restaurant business, so dollars and cents I understand. So I always put it in those terms. You know, you got to look at the cost benefit to everything. But again, this is good erosion control mulch. You can see here you got a big berm, you got some what I refer to as chocolate milk kind of water coming off a site, hits the berm, gets cleaned up before it leaves the site. And that's what some good erosion control mulch is going to look like. It is going to look like the mulch you get at the local store. It's going to look dirtier, grittier. But that stuff, you put it down, it stays there, and it deteriorates, and that stuff will start growing green before you know it. It's really great, and a lot of contractors now are scooping up their erosion control mulch after the job is done and the site is completely stabilized, and they'll go and put it around the outside of the house before they bring in the other mulch, just to save a little money and put the expensive mulch on top and get the same goal from it. What this slide's really getting at is the certified contractor language. That's something that went into play in statute, and essentially if you're going to be disturbing soil, you need a certified person on site to make sure your erosion control is holding up. And that doesn't mean they need to sit in their truck and watch the silt fence and watch the berm. It just means they got to come in and check in on it. Make sure that nobody's back to pick up over the berm, or the silt fence is in incorrectly or something like that. But it is something that, as planning board members, and when you're reviewing permits, you know, having a little line on the top for certified contractor number. So everybody who's certified has a number, and just write it right on there, and that way you know who's doing what where, and you can track it a little bit. Now, one thing that comes up, I immediately usually get these questions of, but I don't know who I'm using as my contractor, I'm just applying for the permit. Well, local municipalities could always conditionally approve your permit based on you providing them the certified contractor number, who you're going to use. Because I understand that. You want to come in and get your permit before you got a guy out there bidding on the job and you start paying somebody for work that may or may not be able to occur. But that's an option for folks reviewing permits as well. Now, an excavation contractor, everybody a lot of times is like, well, geez, if I go out and I'm doing some work in my yard, do I need to be certified? No. If you're a homeowner, you can go out and do your own work, and that's all well and good. It extends to municipal officials and road maintenance crews and all of that, timber harvesters, farmers, and of course homeowners doing their work. So basically it comes about when somebody is being paid for a job. Now it doesn't always, because I ran into this too, they're like, you mean paid money? Or I'm trading something for this work. Trading money, however it is. If you're giving someone something to come to do the work, then they need to be certified. And on the DEP website, there is a list of certified contractors. One thing for people to keep in mind is if you go on to the website and it's all by town, and you click on Booth Bay Harbor, you're going to come up with a list of certified contractors that reside or have a mailing address in the town of Booth Bay Harbor. Not just the contractors that work in Booth Bay Harbor. We're seeing a lot of contractors willing to go a little bit further to get the jobs these days. So don't always rely on just looking at that. The surrounding area might be a good thing too. Or if you have someone that you're working with, show them that you're knowledgeable. You have your certified contractor number? Great, perfect. And then they can get going. And if they're not certified, we run classes all year long. They can come, they sit through the day-long class. I used to assist in teaching it. I did like an hour, 2-hour presentation, and Bill LaFlemme did a bunch more. And, it's a really good class. And then after that, they go out and inspect job sites to make sure that you're using what you have learned in the class. Although I think they've actually turned to going and doing some on-site inspections, but also allowing people to send in photographs, digital photographs, which is okay, I guess. I hope that works out, but it is something I'm a little hesitant on. I'd rather see it, because I also take a lot of pictures in my life to make things look really good in a picture, and sometimes they don't always look all that great. So, why we do all of this stuff is to maintain vegetation. Vegetation is a cheap, natural way to control stormwater, to slow it down, to reduce soil erosion, obviously provide habitat for birds, wildlife, shade for aquatic organisms, and privacy, and conserve the natural character of Maine. That was something I through my time, I've seen folks want to be right next to the water. They want to build as close as they can. And I've seen this trend where now people want to get back a little bit, and they don't want, the neighbors going by on the party barge to be able to look right in, so they'll move back a little bit. But there has been some additions to the vegetation definition. This is something I, for the life of me, could not wrap my head around when I started with shoreland zoning. If a tree was under 4.5 feet tall, it wasn't a tree. It was just vegetation. I couldn't deal with that. Like, that's a maple tree. It doesn't matter how tall it is. So we've enhanced that definition. So if you got a sapling, which is, again, a tree that is over 4.5 feet tall, but it may not be the correct diameter at 4.5 feet tall, it'd be less than 2 inches, then it's considered a sapling. A seedling, something that's under 4.5 feet tall, and then obviously the classic definition of a woody perennial, well-defined trunk, at least 2 inches diameter at 4.5 feet above ground level, and has a height maturity of 10 feet. That's kind of getting at a lot of, we did see some more ornamental type tree species being put in place, and that definition kind of cleans up some of that stuff. If you've got a really short non-native tree, let's say, it may not meet the definition of a tree anymore. You're trying to get back to Maine trees. Buffer standards, removal of vegetation. Obviously, this hasn't really changed much at all. It's 100 feet along great ponds and rivers that flow to a great pond, 75 feet on rivers and streams and wetlands, 75 feet on trib streams within the shoreline zone. Canopy openings, you can't create canopy openings bigger than 250 square feet. The one change, kind of like the dock thing, it used to say in there, a meandering path. Wasn't clear enough, so now it says a single meandering path. So it kind of reduces the amount of footpaths you have winding down through stuff. And that doesn't mean that you can't just, create that natural path by just walking out through your woods and all that. Nobody's trying to stop anybody from doing that. We're talking about these 6-foot wide paths where you got to remove vegetation. A lot of times people put erosion control mulch or something like that down for foot traffic, nice underfoot. But that was the change. Moving trees and saplings is based on the point system. That's always been there. Pruning trees, bottom third, is what's been allowed for a long time. Still in place. Trying to get away from, we run into some very weird tree cutting and pruning activities, and kind of referred to as, I'm sure everybody's seen it at some point, lollipopping of trees, where you have a huge trunk that goes up a long way, and then there's just a little round tuft at the top. Trees don't typically like that very much, and down in this area with the wind that you get, you're really setting yourself up for a potential problem if you're doing that. One thing that we've run into, and people have asked the question, well, if I could remove that tree because I have enough points, why can't I prune it the way I want? It's a good point, and in those situations, we've left it up to the municipalities to make the call on that, because yes, if you could remove that tree, you could just cut it down and be done with it. So if you want to over prune it, I guess that would be up to you. But that would be something that you're going to want to get approved from planning board if that's the authority, or local CEO. I always tell people, if they're going to go out and do some tree removal, if I'm doing it, I'm having my local CEO out, we're marking the trees together, I'm having it very clear of what's going on. That way, when the chainsaw starts up and all the neighbors call in, that I can say very clearly, I met with Jeff, we went over this, and this is what's going on. And when he would get the calls, he could say, he met with the property owner, we've been over it very clearly, there's a grid system laid out, and it's in points compliance. Because, let's be honest, chainsaws start up, phones start ringing, people want to know what's going on. And good on them for that, because without those people, a lot of things may start happening. So, now, within the shoreline buffer, hazard trees has always been a real tough nut to crack, to be honest with you. It's very clear in the guidelines now. There's a whole hazard tree section. It all used to be policy. It all used to be, somebody calls in, they have a question, we would talk to them about it and figure out where we move to. Now it's very clear, all drawn right out, and it makes it clear for citizens, local planning boards, select boards, and CEOs to know what's going on. Now, if you got some hazard trees and they've come down and it creates this cleared opening, then yes, there's probably going to be some replanting that needs to occur, unless there's some undergrowth that's already there and started and it's going to pop right up. Usually like to see that happen within the first year. Outside the buffer, if you've exceeded the volume of trees that can be removed over a 10-year period, then there may be some replanting that needs to be done. Obviously, CEO may require a professional evaluation of it, and could be a 1-to-1 for 8-inch DBH trees. And DBH is that height measurement, so 4.5 feet out, how big is around is the tree at that point. And that's where we take all our measurements to come up with a point system. Now, this is it has a tree definition. It's all, like I said, all spelled right out, and you guys can read through that. It's right in there. Here's one thing I always, citizens, that's one thing, but for planning boards, select boards, and CEOs, hazard trees are probably the most difficult thing to deal with. And the reason is the following. I do CEO trainings every year, and Colby College has been nice enough to allow me to go out to a piece of property that was donated to them from a family. And 2 years ago, I was out doing a training out there. I went out 2 weeks before the training to set it up, lay out grids so I can, walk people through certain scenarios. There was this huge spruce tree, beautiful tree, green right to the top. I remember walking by it and thinking, if a tree was going to be cut and brought down to New York or to Washington for their Christmas tree events, that would be one. It is perfect. I went back 10 days later, 2 days before the training was going to occur, and that tree was on the ground. Like, what the? The tree was perfect. I get out there and look, and it literally was a straw. The entire middle of it was gone. But that tree, you would never think in a million years that it wasn't healthy, because it was perfect. Perfectly green, no dead branches, everything was fine. So I always caution people on that. If someone comes in and said, yeah, I got this hazard tree, and I need to deal with it. Unless you're an arborist, it's tough to tell. And unless you're experienced in going out and coring trees and really getting to the meat and potatoes of what's going on in a tree, it's tough. So if there is that sense that, maybe it isn't a hazard, maybe it is, maybe you have somebody go out and assist you in that documentation of whether it's a hazard or not. I'm always very cautionary on that. If it's a tree that looks like it's going to fall on a house, or if it's down next to the dock where a bunch of kids are going to be playing all summer, I'm kind of the mindset of get it out of there, replant, and move on, just because of that situation. I never would have thought that tree come down, and it did. And gosh, I would have felt horrible, if somebody gets hurt by something like that. It's not. Trees can grow back. People can't. So, but there again, there's a lot of people who say stuff are hazards that aren't. So it's a very difficult task to undertake as a CEO, planning board, or select board members. Dead trees is pretty easy, right? Everybody can kind of see what a dead tree is. No foliage, doesn't come out. It's just dead and gone. I have a tree just like that in a place in Augusta, and when we bought the house, it was beautiful. Little cherry tree, produced fruit, the whole deal. Within 6 or 8 years, dead as a doornail, and I still don't know why. I know there's a lot of ants on it. There's a lot of woodpecker holes. I don't know if that's what it was or what, but they go quick, and if they do, those clearly are hazards. Get them out of there. The biggest thing is you don't go out and start digging up the stumps. Stumps are what holds the ground together, especially when you get into a shoreline situation. You start pulling stumps out of a shoreline, you're immediately going to start having issues. And I've seen this firsthand. People go out, something dies, they dig it up, they rock it down, they're like, oh, I rip-wrapped it, it's fine. And then 3 years later, oh, my rip-wrap's failing. Yeah, because that tree was holding all that stuff nice together. So you can grind them right down to the flat and be done with it. But digging up those roots, that's what's holding everything together. And obviously, you can't be creating new lawns through that. Storm damaged trees, this is kind of what we went over a few minutes ago. If you do have some natural revegetation coming up, give it a year, see what it looks like. That's something that towns can definitely do, and allow people to have that year grace period to see what happens. A lot of times people will dig up trees outside of the shoreland zone if they have property outside the shoreland zone and replant those inside. They're taking nice natural trees that are growing in another part of their property and putting them out there, which is very viable as long as they're dug up and put down right. Storm damaged tree, we've had a lot of storms in Maine since I've been alive, and the one I remember the most was the ice storm, and how many of those trees that got topped during that. There's just so many trees that you walk through the woods today and you look up and it's a nice crown, but all the way at the top it's snapped off, and they're surviving. They're still doing fairly well, but in some cases they split and take more down and it's not going to recover. So those are going to turn into hazards. Time to take them down and get it taken care of. So exemptions from clearing. Obviously, existing cleared areas, they can be maintained. And pretty much how we've looked at that, if you're going out and bush hogging an area once a year, once every 2 years, you're maintaining your cleared opening. And that's absolutely fine. You got permitted activities that are located in the shoreline setbacks. That's fine as well. Agriculture, as long as they're using their BMPs, best management practices, and they meet the agricultural standards, they're good to go there as well. One thing that got added to this, it was always just a no-brainer, right? You say an oil truck, I know a few years ago in the Central Maine area, oil truck, icy day, going around a corner, thing flips over, it's right next to the pond, there's a bunch of oil on the ground. Well, you got to go out and dig that stuff up. You got to get that stuff taken care of. And before, it was just always a policy. I mean, it was kind of this thing that everybody knew, right? There's an oil spill, you have to clean it up, and that's going to require somebody digging, vegetation being removed, and all of that. Well, now it's right in Chapter 1000. It's spelled out very clearly. There's no ambiguity, so there isn't this, debate on whether something should be cleaned up. It also includes, brownfield sites, old industrial sites that, again, like the old brick buildings that are being repurposed. A lot of times they may have some negative stuff that's in the ground outside them. Get those cleaned up and revegetate the area and all of that. Non-natives. This is something that has come up a lot more lately. Japanese knotweed, or when I was a kid I was just called it bamboo, right? And make great pea shooters, but they aren't very good for your shoreline, because a lot of those type of plants that grow, they dominate the area so much that they don't allow any of that low ground cover to exist. If you get under a Japanese knotweed setup, it's usually bare ground. Jewelweed is the same way. It's just dirt under there. It's the weirdest thing. So there's a process, and it's very well spelled out. Again, it used to be policy, now it's in the document, how you can remove it, what the expectations are, and the like. Poison ivy is another big one. Something that people have a real hard time with. I know I get anywhere near it, I get it. My wife doesn't get it. Thankfully my kids don't get it or haven't got it, and I know they've run through it because I followed them and I got it. So there's a list of some non-native species. There's a more defined list that Agriculture and Conservation have on the Natural Areas Program list. So emergency response stuff, this is kind of what I was talking about. This is the oil spill that happened right down next to the ponds. They've got proper erosion control in place, they've got their cells in place, they're removing everything, and obviously the goal is to always put it back to the way it was or as close to it. But you got to clean that stuff up. Revegetation standards. So this is more when something has gone wrong, or maybe somebody got a little overzealous and cut a little bit too much. Before, it was, again, something that we would talk to planning boards, select boards, local CEOs about. What do you need to do to replant an area that too much vegetation has been removed from? And again, now it's completely spelled out within the document. That way you as a citizen understand what your role is. It's written right there. The people doing the enforcement work are very clear on what needs to be done as well. So there isn't this, well, I thought I needed to do this, you said I needed to do that. No, it's right there. It's crystal clear. So the biggest thing for municipalities when you're working with a potential violation on a revegetation plan, in my opinion, what I've run into is you got to have a timeline set up, and what I have always used is ask the person, the property owner, the person that has to do the revegetation, to provide me that timeline. And that way it isn't me telling them what they need to do by when, it's them telling me what they can do by a certain time, and if that doesn't happen, then you didn't force them into that. They decided it on their own terms, and that way if enforcement goes a little further, it will be a little cleaner. But that is very important. Having a plan laid out, knowing what your timeline is, and what the expectations are. Now, that isn't to say that something may happen and that may move. You know, Patriots Day storm hits and, you know, things gets washed out. I mean, that plan could move, but at that point, someone could come back to the town and say, hey, this is what happened. I need an extension on my timeline, and, you know, usually people that are willing to work on that can get it done. Tree revegetation standards. Basically, we just don't want people putting back a monoculture. So if you have more than 3 trees that need to be replanted, you got to have multiple species. You can't have more than 50% of one species. This is a replanting that happened down in southern Maine. Pretty aggressive cut that happened. And as you can see, it was a pretty aggressive replanting plan that went in place. They spent a lot of money putting those trees back. Biggest thing for local communities when you're following up on this, you could have a survival rate. You have to go back and check it once a year for 5 years to make sure everything is surviving, everything is thriving. You want it to reestablish some screening and act as a buffer, act as it did before. Shrubs, that's the vegetation under 3 feet. That does a lot of the good quality erosion control. They usually have good root masses. Through the years when people have been doing shoreline stabilization work, they ask, well, what plant should I plant, you know, down here? Mine was always high bush blueberries. Everybody always loves them. If you don't, the birds do. And the best thing about them is however big the bush is up top, the roots are equal or bigger down bottom, and they really hold stuff in place, so it's a good plant. Again, you're looking at survival rates and all of that, and making sure it stays good for 5 years. Ground cover is the other one. Usually when there's been a cutting incident, the ground cover is disturbed as well. And that's that duff layer, that, you know, pine straw and, you know, deteriorating leaves and all of that is down there. You know, this is something that can be supplemented with some good erosion control mulch. That way it grows green and real quick, and it really retains the water, retains the soil, and it's real effective. This is that same spot, just a closer view of the ground. They did some point plantings of some vegetation that will spread and cover up that whole area, and supplemented in between with erosion control mulch. That way things aren't running off. Nonconformities, you know, this is, you know, legal existing nonconformities is what a lot of people have on their property right now. Times were different when camps were built in the 50s and 60s and 70s. They were close to the water. They're legally existing nonconforming. This one here has gone a little bit further. They've got, I think, about every size of plastic storage structure. I mean, just all the way down. I mean, they got the big, the medium, the small, and the extra small here. So, and this is the kind of thing that towns run into all the time, you know, and they're like, oh, it's not a structure, it's just something where I store my life vests. Well, this is a structure. The grass isn't growing underneath it. It's a structure. Now, you know, there are provisions within shoreline zoning to allow someone to put a small shed down front for some of this stuff, and there's a shed provision right in there. But that limits to one 8x10 and 80 square foot thing, and not, you know, 7 or 40 of them, you know, down there. So, now, non-conforming structures, you know, obviously doesn't meet the standards. That's why it's non-conforming. But it was established at a time when it was lawful to have it there, and that's absolutely fine. Now here, this is a photo down in New Hampshire. This is kind of why there's folks like me and folks like your planning board out here doing this kind of work. You know, hey, camp life is camp life, right? Summer in Maine, you always love this kind of stuff. But, you know, when you start seeing this kind of stuff where there's just no vegetation at all, it's just retaining wall and bark mulch and all that stuff, that you know that when it rains, that stuff is just running right off this roof and right down through here and isn't stopping until it gets to the lake. And here's a nice, hadn't really noticed it before, I mean, here's the classic lollipop. I mean, all the way to the top, there's no branches at all. And to me, that spells trouble. I know that waterfront property is not cheap. And if that tree or those trees fall over back on those properties, that's going to be an expensive thing. And the expensive part of it is the least of your worries. If you're in there sleeping at night, you know, that's a problem. And you may have created it by over pruning your tree. See, that's why we're all here trying to, you know, do the right thing for the environment, to leave it better than we found it. Now, if you're doing some reconstruction, if you're doing less than 50% of the market value, then, you know, that's something that you can do, and you don't have to worry about relocation or any of that stuff. Now, if you're doing more than 50% of the market value, that's when planning boards and towns need to start considering, does this thing need to move back to become more conforming? And again, this is for non-conforming structures. There is something that was cleaned up in the Chapter 1000 that I actually picked up on, right when I started. In the old Chapter 1000, when you looked under the foundation section, the font in the document was actually slightly different, and it wasn't really all that noticeable. And I'd always ask them, like, how did that happen? Because it was under the expansion section. So if you didn't expand the non-conforming structure, if you merely lifted it up and put a foundation under it and set it back down, then you didn't need to go through greatest practical extent review and look at moving the structure back, because you didn't expand it, and that's how it was interpreted by the AG's office and some lawyers. Well, that's been cleaned up, because what I think happened, and I wasn't there at the time, I was doing a completely different job then, I think when it went through the revision process, somebody just hit that tab button. You know how easy it is to mishit a key every once in a while, and it just moved that thing in, so it was under that section, and then all of a sudden it's under that umbrella. It's been moved back out, it's now in the right place. So, I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, it may not be what folks with a non-conforming structure that want to put a foundation under it want to hear a lot of times, but if you've already got the thing jacked up, that's when you move it. You're already there. You're more than 50% of the way there. So that's your opportunity to go through greatest practical extent review, have your planning board review it, and move that thing back. Now, it doesn't always mean you're going to have to move all the way back. There may be your septic back there. There may be some big trees. There may be a rock outcropping that you can't get back. But it gives towns an opportunity to take a look at it. And, you know, when you're reviewing it, this is what you're looking at. What's there on the site? What are the site conditions? What are the things that are precluding something from being moved? And this is where municipalities can call someone like myself to get an opinion. You know, we'll come down, take a look at it, and oftentimes that's a little easier. You know, having someone from the state come down and help assisting making that call, and helps everybody out in that case. So here's a little slide for when we're talking about relocation, and this is kind of what we've got into through the years. Original location of the camp over here in the gray, they want to relocate it to meet the setback along this river. Well, when they do that, they're also going to do an expansion, and folks know that after the 75-foot line on, you know, the coast or a river, that's when you can build essentially whatever. You just have to deal with lot coverage type of issues then. But this isn't greatest practical extent. You know, when folks are reviewing this stuff, if this thing can be moved outside the 75-foot setback, that's where it has to go. And the old adage on this that I've always used and explained to people is you relocate first and expand second. So when someone comes in for something like that, you go through the process of, all right, let's see your relocation plan without your expansion, and then look at what you want to expand after it's been relocated. Makes it a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier for both the people that are applying and reviewing to look at. Relocate first, expand second, and move on from there. Now, this is what is in a lot of people's ordinances as it is now, 30% rule, floor area and volume. Now, floor area is a defined thing in the old Chapter 1000, volume is a defined thing. It's based on what you had in 1989, and you know, people laugh, but if I brought in 10 consultants, 10 CEOs, 10 planning board members into this room right here and asked people to give me the volume of this room, I venture to guess I'm going to get 15 to 20 different answers. Because let's be honest, folks aren't geometry professors. You know, that's what volume is. It's an exercise in geometry class. And some towns have programs that they can pump some of this stuff into, but not everybody has those resources. And it became very difficult for people to come up with those numbers and effectively use them. Obviously, you can't expand toward the resource. If you're going to do expansion, you got to do it laterally or back. You can't make your structure more non-conforming. Calculation of floor area and volume, you know, seems crystal clear, right? Seems like a lot of math. But, you know, that's what's been in place for a long time. That's what people have used and people have adjusted to it. But it's something that's very difficult and people are having a hard time with it. What we've moved to is the following. Well, what also was in place was the alternative. There was, when you had the 30% floor area and volume, there was also the floor area and height alternative, and it had a cap and a certain number of square feet, a certain height within a certain zone. So what the legislature did is combine the two old options, 30% rule and the floor area and height, and have come up with this new thing, footprint and height. Changing from floor area and volume to footprint and height. Tiered basis, based on how far you are away from the resource. And what it does is, again, my whole intent in doing this job is to make it easier for the public, easier for the regulators, easier for the CEOs, easier for the planning boards, select boards, townspeople, consultants, everybody. Because when you're dealing with footprint and height, footprint, again, very easily defined. The entire structure, the entire area of ground that's covered by structures on a lot, including not limited to cantilevered or similar overhanging structures, as well as unenclosed structures such as patios and decks. So I would venture to guess if I brought in those 30 people into this room, let's just pretend that this is our entire camp, we could all measure the outside of the box and come up with the same number. You know, that's a lot easier to deal with, and it's a lot cleaner. Everybody understands, there's no ambiguity there. Now, in the document, in the Chapter 1000 document, footprint shows up in a number of different areas when you're dealing with floor area. So these are the 4 areas in the definitions that need to add footprint to and have some replacements there. Here's a little slide that kind of goes through. I'm more of a visual learner. The language in there is kind of strange to read over and over again, so this is a better representation that I've kind of come up with here. So inside 25 feet to the resource, no expansion unless the entire structure is located inside 25 feet. If you have something that's straddling the 25-foot line, you are not entirely inside 25 feet, therefore the portion that is inside 25 feet cannot be expanded. If you're entirely located inside 25 feet, you can expand up to 800 square feet or 30% of the existing structure. The maximum height in that area, 15 feet, or the height of your existing structure. So if you've got a 30-foot tall camp all located inside 25 feet, I'm not saying you need to cut off 15 feet, you keep the 30 feet and you can expand up to there. Fairly simple. Inside 75 feet, you can expand up to 1,000 square feet, 30% of the existing structure, whichever is greater. Maximum combined total footprint, so that's combining all the structures that are on your property. No accessory structure expansion if closer to the shoreline than the principal structure. So if you have one of those sheds down in front of your camp, legally existing non-conforming structure, but it's closer to the resource than your principal structure, your camp, your house, then that accessory structure cannot be expanded. But you can use the footprint of that accessory structure along with the footprint of your camp and use that to come up with your number of your expansion. Now, I'll get into something else here in a minute, but outside of 75, but inside 100, and keep in mind, this is just on Great Ponds, this part right here. If you're dealing with coastal stuff, that will be my next slide, so we can get to this. But 1,500 square feet, 30%, whichever is greater, maximum combined. No accessory structure expansion if located closer to the shoreline of the principal structure. Maximum height, 25 feet, or existing height. Now, if you're on the coast, you're on tidal waters, you're on a freshwater wetland, you're on a river stream or brook, trib stream, you get similar criteria, but it's just for the first 75 feet. So again, inside 25, no expansions unless completely inside the 25. If you're straddling, you expand off the back, 15 feet in height. Inside 75, 1,000 square feet, 30%, 20 feet in height. Resource protection. This is something that you get into. This new expansion principle in Chapter 1000 allows people to still do some expansions even if they are located in a resource protection district. So you get the same expansion thresholds for everything inside 75 feet, but outside of that, between 75 and 250, you're limited to 1,500 square feet, 30%, whichever is greater, maximum height of 25 feet. So that's going to extend all the way back in the resource protection district. If you're outside of 250, you don't need to worry about this. Now, here's a little pop quiz, so to speak. Not really, but you're looking at this, given what we're at, and see over on the right-hand side, you got your expansion principles. You got this situation going on. What can you expand? Okay, so we're straddling, so you can't be expanding the front of that at all. So you can expand 30% of the rear of the shed, the rear of the camp, or the shed, since that is located behind the principal structure, or the garage back there. Again, you got a similar situation. You got a camp inside. Now it's totally located inside the 25-foot line. You got your garage down there. It's pretty close to the water for a garage, and then you got a shed. So again, you got an accessory structure inside 25 feet, so that's not being expanded. The camp or the shed could be expanded up to the cap or the 30% in this specific situation. This is, the garage is a little bit out of place, but this is usually what we see a little bit more of. So you got an accessory structure inside where the principal structure is, so you can't expand that. You got another accessory structure inside 25 feet, can't expand that. So you're left with the expansion of the camp only, 30%. And essentially we're just looking at the 30% there because if you add it up, they're already over the cap of 1,000 square feet, so you would be with that. Now, let's go back to this for a second. I just wanted to say this. At the municipal level, when you guys are adopting your ordinance and when citizens are voting on it, some towns will choose to be a little bit more restrictive than the minimum guidelines, because what we say is, say we're inside 75 feet to a great pond or coastal wetland or whatever, you'd 1,000 square foot cap or 30%. A lot of towns will leave that in, and it allows the property owner to make that choice, what they want to do. Some towns are choosing to be a little bit more restrictive on that and say, nope, we're going with the cap. You can only expand all your structures to 1,000 square feet combined. And that because they want to protect their shoreline a little bit more heavily, or that's the community they want to protect. That's what they envision their town looking at. Because that's what this is all about, right? It's what you folks all want your municipality to look like when it comes to development along resources. So there is that option as well. You guys could absolutely choose one or the other. In terms of the guidelines, it's 1,000 square feet or 30%, whichever is greater. That allows for more, but it's something to keep in mind there when you're looking at that. So we don't do the classic office photos when we're like having photos. We are more woodsy fishermen hunting people. So mine, obviously, you can barely tell it's me. I was pre-kid right there. some good times. Can't see it, but I got like a 5-pound brook trout in my hands, and that's why that smile's that big. And my counterpart, Mike Morris, down in the Portland office, we're at the same exact river. I'm actually standing right behind his baseball hat, a mile away up that river. And fortunately for us, we were without a third shoreline zoning person out of the Bangor office for a little bit longer than I was comfortable with. But in November of last year, after about 6 months of waiting to fill the position, we were able to fill that position up there, and I am so happy that Dawn Abbott accepted our position. She's been with the state 27 years. She's a real go-getter, and it's amazing. She has come up to speed so quickly, and I really appreciate the work that she's putting in. So in your slides there, those are the contacts for the 3 shoreline zoning personnel. And that's another thing I add into this. It's pretty amazing. There's the state of Maine, right? There's 456 organized towns in the state of Maine. We have 3 of us. That's our area. And Dawn catches kind of the short end of the stick. She's got blue and the pink up top. So she's got the most land, but the least people. I have a little bit more land than Mike, and a little bit more people than Don, and then Mike has got the southern part of the state where there's a lot of development, a lot of people, and a lot of action down there. So, but if you're ever trying to reach me, and for some reason you get a voicemail and I'm off taking a great vacation, you can always get in touch with my counterparts, and they can tell you exactly the same thing I would. That's the last thing I'll leave you guys with is the biggest thing with shoreline zoning, whether it's at the municipal level or at the state level, consistency is key. That's the one thing that I've preached since I've taken over this job. If it isn't the same for every single person, then it isn't worth doing, because it's a joke, right? If Buddy down the road can get away being a little bit closer because of this or that, then you can, then that's simply not fair. It has to be a level playing field. It has to be consistent. And that is why when an interesting topic comes up, Dawn, Mike, and I will either be on the phone for an hour on a 3-way call trying to tease out the information so we're all on the same page with the situation, or what usually results is about 40 emails between the 3 of us teasing this thing out. But it's effective. It helps us. It's all in writing. We can track it back, and we know that we're all saying the same thing, regardless if you're from Westmoreland up in the county, or you're in South Portland, or you're down in Booth Bay Harbor. That's really the key to all of this. Like I said, whether it's the municipal level or the state level, it's got to be consistent. So
Colin,
yeah.
With the chairman's permission, I'd like to begin the Q&A portion
Sure.
of this evening's entertainment.
Yes.
To your point of consistency, you made a remark that the municipality could choose either a fixed cap
Yep.
or a 30% figure.
Yep.
But you mean that only in the sense of drawing up the ordinance, right? Not on a case-by-case review
Correct.
of plans?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You would integrate that right into your ordinance. That way, every permit that comes in is being reviewed, is being looked at in the same way.
Got it.
And the reason that is allowable, just kind of behind the scenes stuff here, is when you do that, if you picked one part of that out, say you went with a cap or you just went with a 30%, the statute says that your ordinance can be no less stringent or restrictive than the minimum guidelines. If you want to say we're putting the cap at 10% or 500 square feet, you could do that. Because, again, home rule. You guys, as a board, as citizens, get to decide what the development and all of this is going to look like in your community. And there's some towns that do that. There was a lot of towns that really wanted to get on with the footprint and height thing because it essentially made it easier for everybody to deal with. And also, it provided opportunities for people that may not have been able to do something before. And there's also communities out there that were saying, geez, 1,500 square feet, that's too much. We're gonna leave it at 1,200, or we're only gonna go 25%, which is perfectly fine as well. That's the beauty of home
as
rule.
well, but
Yes.
I'll wait for others to ask
Okay.
theirs first.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Column, page 15, where you got into the difference between ponds
Yep.
and then where we are.
Yes.
Coastal.
We have both.
Can you tell us which is which, because they're not so...
Okay, so on your slides, and I'm sorry, when we do type them up, and let me just take a look. Right at the very bottom in the blue, and yeah, I'm sorry, you probably need a magnifying glass.
Municipal-
Right at the very bottom, it will say Great Pond
Okay.
on one, and then on the next slide, you can see it's, well, you'll just see that there's more words there. Coastal, freshwater, wetland, river stream.
They all seem to say great pond.
Yep. No, go a couple pages back. So you're going to be looking at the slide that's on the screen right
Oh,
here.
these?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
sorry.
Yep, no, not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
But yes, that's the difference. And yeah, in this community you have both, right? There's great ponds down here, there's streams, but you know, your coastline is dominated by an ocean.
Call it Great Pond, 5 acres or more, is that?
30 acres is a great pond. Well, 10 acres natural, 30 acres man-made is what the definition says, I believe, just to make sure. And when we're talking man-made, it could be one of these things where it's dam-controlled water is a lot of, you know, when you get man-made type features. Wow, you Jedi mind tricked me here. You got it stapled on the wrong side. Like, what is going on? Like, oh, I sent you the wrong file. Oh, there you go. Awesome. Yeah, so Great Pond. Yep, 10 acres natural, 30 acres man-made. So, now I'm sure, you know, down here. One thing, I mean, I dealt with the town, it's interesting you bring this up. I was dealing with the town of Whitefield, and they have a lot of gravel pits. They do a lot of mining of gravels in that area. And one of the pits that they were mining was in excess of 30 acres. It was 33 acres or something like that when it was going to be all worked out. And I'd actually never seen this as a reclamation plan. They were going to drill multiple wells in the bottom of the pit and flood it. And I thought that was really interesting. And they asked, well, you know, do we shoreland zone the pit now? And I'm like, well, no, it doesn't have any water in it. You know, you can't shoreland zone a mining operation. But it was very interesting. It kind of got my wheels turning of like, wow, if you're a property owner there and you're adjacent to that pit, and a lot of times people don't like that, you know, let's be honest. You know, you got a gravel pit operating next to you, you probably, maybe you're not that psyched that that's happening, but in 10 years you might be, because you might be rolling around on a jet ski out there in a nice 30-acre pond. But it was interesting that that kind of came up, and they were so ahead of the game on that they're asking about it when there's still excavators out there digging dirt and gravel. So, wow. Yeah.
On page 6, there's a structure below the shoreline.
Structures below the shoreline.
Right there you are.
Okay. Yep.
It says one structure, one dock. You know, many people, you know, businesses have one here, but lots of floats.
Yes. Yeah, and do you mean floats that aren't attached to their?
Well, attached to the,
Okay. Yep.
but they're all attached.
Yep. That is part of, we look at it as one consistent structure. It isn't going to be, oh, you added another float. But that is something that at the municipal level that they review, especially, you know, when people are adding on to existing piers or wharfs or something like that. If it's a wharf that was permitted with the DEP under the Natural Resource Protection Act, if somebody is going to add floats to that to extend it out, they would also have to come back into the department as well as to the planning board to get that expansion modification approved. But no, you're fine. Adding a float to it isn't going to count as two docks, let's say. Yeah, it'd have to be coming off from the shoreline.
Question, thank you for what you've told us, and I
Sure.
have a better understanding of the ordinance.
Good.
But what I don't know is what the town's going to do, so.
It's a great question.
So.
I can't answer that though.
So here, as a citizen who's going to vote,
Yeah.
when will we learn whether what you've described is what we're going to adopt?
I guess I will turn that over to these folks right here. They're going to know that a lot better than I will.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, would you repeat? Thank you.
I appreciate what we learned from Colin, but it's kind of interesting information until you can confirm to us who have to vote that that's what you're going to adopt, or ask us to adopt. So I assume that you all have met or will be meeting to determine whether this ordinance will be adopted as written, or whether you're going to take the option that I gather other towns have taken. So could you explain what the next steps are?
There's several different approaches. The board, upon hearing this and reviewing the material and being able to ask Colin this evening, we can, and as I understand, I think there's 4 areas that, there's the timber harvesting, there's the outcropping, there's the shoreline and Great Pond expansions, and
Yep.
and the height.
Yep.
If we seem to come with a consensus on that, we can then make a recommendation that this then gets put in front of the selectmen for their review and amendment or adoption, and then at that point, it could be then put into a format for a town meeting.
Yep. You guys do the warrant articles,
Yes.
send it out for town vote, all of that. Yeah, and another thing I'll throw out there is, and what a lot of municipalities have taken advantage of is, once a town, because that's a great question, here's the information, where do we go from here? Where's this bus going? After you towns have these discussions like this and learn of potential options, a lot of times they'll send in the draft into the department, into me if you're in this area, just for a general review. This is what we were thinking about. These are the changes. These are the things that were optional that we are going with or not going with. Can you take a look at it? That way, before it gets out into warrant article and people start voting on it, the town has some assertion that when it actually gets submitted back to the department for commissioner's approval after adoption locally, that it's going to be approved. And some towns take advantage of that, some towns do not. It all depends on how they're going to work their document. And some towns, especially in the Central Maine area, their shoreline zoning document gets integrated into their full land use ordinance that may be 500 pages long, and they just splatter shoreline zoning all through it. Towns that simply have a local shoreline zoning ordinance in one document, it makes it a little bit easier, number one, for citizens to look at and to be able to make a educated decision on how they want to vote. And it makes it a little bit easier on you folks that are writing it up and doing the adoption process. Not that either one is better or worse, because say for the town of Auburn, theirs is integrated into a big old ordinance, and that's what they've always had, and that's what they're used to, and that's what they work with, and that's good to go. It does make it a little difficult when I start reviewing it, because that's not what I work with. I work with this one document. But whenever the town is at a level that you guys have made some choices or are thinking about making choices, feel free. Contact me. I can help you through the process. That way, when you do get it out in front of the voters, they have the best information, the best document that they can have to take a vote on. So.
Thank you.
Sure. Go.
Building on just what you said, and I don't know what happens this, but I don't know anything about winds. WHEN, when? Can you give us, anybody give us an approximate timetable for these Well, let's-
Oh, when this adoption would take place?
By the town.
Yeah, okay.
What would the estimated timetable?
Well, I mean, it could be as quickly as July 1st, if you want it. It's a matter of how, proactive the planning board wants to be, whether they want to have a discussion tonight, or whether they want to discuss some of those proposed amendments that they want to forward onto the Board of Selectmen, whether the Board of Selectmen want to have continued discussions or additional public hearings, when they want to set that special town meeting.
And there's, just to be clear, a lot of times when the state amends Chapter 1000, it will come out as a mandatory adoption. And in 2006, that's what happened. You had a timeline where you needed to adopt by, and that's it. That isn't how this is. If somebody sends in an amendment, it has to be consistent with Chapter 1000, but it isn't something that is mandatory at this point. Now, could that change in the future? Quite possibly, but it hasn't been brought to my attention that it would. We're kind of just letting towns breathe a little bit and look at it and see what they like and what they don't like. I think a lot of towns are updating because the fact that it makes everybody's life easier. And that's what it's all about in this regard. I mean, I'll be honest, being planning board members or select board members or board of appeal members, it is very difficult. I know that oftentimes I think of my job as fairly thankless. I get a lot of attaboys when I go out in the field. People aren't usually like, "Hey, the DP's here." That's not what I get. I'm not bringing pizza or anything.
That's
But
an idea.
yeah, well, good, right? That's what I should do. Roll out with like lollipops or something. But planning boards and select boards, they're volunteers. This isn't what their life is dedicated to. This is what they do to help the community. So timing and making choices, a lot of times it's based on the feel that you get back. If the community really wants it, then planning boards really get on it. If it's kind of like, then maybe they don't. But at the same time, like I said, a lot of towns are getting on it and doing it. But again, it sounds like you guys have meetings a lot more often than a lot of the towns that I deal with. Most towns that I deal with have one town meeting in March once a year. So that's why it's tough.
No, we normally have just one town meeting, but the concept here was this was such a complex and very topic, it was worthwhile to separate it from the regular town meeting, hold a special town meeting to address it.
It's a great idea. Great idea. Yeah.
I have a situation which the board might want to consider when they draw their recommendations. My property has a very steep bank down to high water, and out of that bank are growing very healthy oak trees,
Yep.
which have very strong root systems.
Absolutely.
I don't want to destroy those root systems, but a storm of the century might.
Right.
And so I'd like to be able to cut those oak trees down low to protect the root systems so they protect the bank.
Right. And that's something that when people have properties like that, because that's definitely a concern. Bank stabilization and integrity of a bank based on trees growing out of it is very important. Because if they do topple over, like you said, they'll just start ripping stuff off. What I can say is if you get into that situation and you have a property that has more trees than just those that are growing there, if you work with your local CEO and figure out what the points are, maybe those trees can be removed and cut down exactly like you say, and nothing needs to be replanted. And a lot of people will do that. They'll cut them down to either down to ground level or 4 feet in height, so it's just a stump that's sitting there. Some people will dress them up with some planters and stuff like that, but definitely down in a coastal community like this, it's something to be aware of and monitoring. And that's something that you can do by getting down and looking at the area, checking after storms, has anything moved? And again, just like these pictures, I take a lot of pictures of stuff just because I don't necessarily remember slow changes. It's like your kids growing up, right? It seems like my daughter was just born, she turned 11 this weekend, and I'm sitting there shaking my head going, wait a minute here. You know, you were tiny, you fit in one hand, and now you have a cell phone and are texting me. You know, so it doesn't make a lot of sense a lot of times. But and things just change so slowly that you miss it. So that would be another thing that I might recommend in that specific situation is you start documenting it, whether it's with photographs or I had a wall leaning at a property I have in Augusta, and I swear every time I went up there, I'm like, man, I think that wall is this little slate retaining wall. It's nothing going to hurt anything. It's not falling into the water. It's just going to fall into my lawn. But for years I'd look at it like, I think that's falling over, but I could never really tell. So I started putting stuff in the wall. So when I went back, like, no, it's not moving. It just looks like it is because of, you know, what your memory thinks is straight and realize that it's not really doing anything. So, but, yeah.
One more, page 15,
Okay. What's the slide look like?
footprint expansion highlights, coastal. Top, this one, top right.
Top right. Gotcha.
I think I understand it, but I'm not sure.
I'll tell you, I answer more questions on that than about anything these days. That hole entirely located inside 25 feet is one that has buggered people up.
This one.
Yep, okay.
That one right there. I'm not referring to anything below the 25, closer to the 25. If one has a structure, some of which is within 75 feet.
Okay.
And the other part is beyond it.
Correct. Good.
I think I understand it, but one thing that might confuse me is maximum combined total footprint. What's combined total footprint mean in that context?
In that context, combined total footprint is going to be the area that is located inside of 75 feet.
Thank you, that's all I need to know.
Including sheds.
Including sheds, including
Patios.
all that,
no,
all that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that maximum combined total footprint didn't pertain to the whole building combined, what's
Outside.
inside now.
Right, right.
Just with it.
Yep.
Thank
Because
you.
what a lot of people will do is they'll maximize their footprint inside the 75 to get the most bang for their buck, you know, why wouldn't you? And then beyond that 75, where you're only controlled by lot coverage or non-vegetated surface, you can build, or road setbacks, sideline setbacks, all that stuff's not shoreline zoning, but yes, good point, that you're controlled with that. So people will, again, if they're going to expand, they can get the most bang for their buck. Absolutely, it's a good point, it's good designation.
But if that's something like a garage within 75 feet or partly within 75 feet,
Yep.
and it's closer to the shoreline, it can't be changed.
Let's assume that it's closer than the principal structure, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Correct, correct. Now, here's a situation that I ran into. Say you have a garage that the front of it is closer than the principal structure, but the back is beyond the front edge of the principal structure. Then, if you're going to do some expansion, you could do it off the back of that structure. You just can't expand any closer to the resource. So, yeah.
I wanted to follow up on Andy's first question. He was a
Yeah.
little ahead of me on this. In choosing between footprint and height and 30%, the one you have is municipal officials may choose to limit expansion to only the cap or the 30%.
Yep.
But I take from that they could also choose to leave it as a landowner's choice.
Absolutely.
So there are really three options. You could either go choice, cap, or all 30%.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And actually, let's be honest. There's four. You got 30%. You got cap. You got both, or you got do nothing.
Or you leave it the way it is.
You can stay with your 30% volume and volume and floor area, and figure out the geometry and volume and all of that stuff. Yes.
Colin, to reiterate what you said, the town is under no mandate to act on these revisions. There's no deadline. They could, in fact, through their process, deliberate, decide they're going to adopt it, but that could be 6 months or a year down the road, unless you change.
Absolutely.
In other words, there is no urgency.
There's nothing pushing you to get there. The only thing that typically pushes planning boards to get there is you folks.
And would I assume that there will be I guess this would be for the town, a public hearing when you arrive at your final recommendation before you offer this as a warrant article at a town meeting, either special or regular annual meeting?
There would be the recommendation of the planning board, and then it would go before our select board for review and recommendation and comment.
And then
So this
the
is
town meeting?
this is the required public hearing, and then it would go to the Board of Selectmen, and the board obviously would be some review of what they recommend and what's pushed forward to them, and then it would go to town meeting. So not another public hearing.
Well,
Jeff,
if
how
it's
can this be
different,
the required public hearing when in fact you don't know what you're going to do or when?
It's-
Shouldn't that come after you
Yeah,
deliberate?
so this just allows the public and the planning board, obviously, all to get a sort of generalized view of what to start with, and then if the board decides to start discussions tonight, table it, move on to another meeting, et cetera, the public can come and they'll work together to get something that the board is comfortable with, gets the public input on, and then forwards that on to the Board of Selectmen.
But is it not statutorily required that you have a public hearing after you've made your recommendation and deliberation?
No, there is. We have to have a public hearing before, for the acceptance of the warrant.
Right.
Anyway, so anytime there's a warrant for town meeting, there's a public hearing before it, so that.
Right, but that's gonna take place, I mean, again, at
Right.
the Board of Selectmen's level, it's not gonna take place, say, another public hearing at the planning board level.
Right, so I think you guys are both correct in that regard, where this is the initial public meeting about this document, but before
Right, I mean,
it
obviously.
goes to town vote, there'll be another
There'll be a public hearing
meeting.
on the warrant.
Correct, about putting the warrant together, and then another meeting for the vote warrant, I think. Or it's just a vote, I don't know if it's a meeting or vote, towns do that differently, so.
I would say that with all the great questions and the insight here, I see a number of future planning board members.
Hey, all right. People are always looking for planning board members.
I understand there's going to be an opening on the planning board.
Maybe indeed.
So just one last question on
Yeah.
that, to the selectmen here and to the planning board.
Sure, Tony.
That public hearing that we just discussed could be part of a Board of Selectmen's meeting. Is that correct? Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Just has to be publicized.
Publicized as such, yeah.
And I'll throw this out there too. Obviously, you know, I stopped the presentation where it got to our pictures and our numbers. There's some additional slides that are probably in your packet that you guys can look at, but that's more of stuff that's very specific topical stuff. A lot of it is dealing with situations that come up that planning boards and CEOs and selectmen deal with. It isn't something that's really part of, you know, a general discussion, but there is some good information that can be gathered from that, and I'm assuming some more questions that could be raised for public meeting in the future. But I wanted to make sure that you realize that, because you get to that last slide that I stopped at, and then, you know, there's 10 more slides after it. But again, those are ones that we've put in place, especially when someone asks a specific question dealing with a topic. I could flip to that slide, but, you know, in this case, you guys are more dealing with updating an ordinance, not open enforcement cases and, you know, situations that you've run into. And obviously, if you guys, you know, look through those and that generates more questions, my number's right there. Give me a buzz. Be happy to talk to anybody about it and see what questions you may have. So.
Well, let me take a moment here to turn internally here with our planning board. As I see it, we have these 4 areas that there are some questions that we need to decide, whether it's the timber housing, the height, the outcropping, and the expansion. Just for our benefit and our education, do we have any questions about, I'll go with the easy one, the timber harvesting. There are 3 options. It's either turned over to the state, a shared responsibility between the state and the code enforcement officer, or leave things as they are with the code enforcement officer. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. Do we have any questions about that?
Don't know. I think we should have some time to think about it. I think you
Okay.
should postpone that to a
Okay.
future meeting.
One point I'll add to that discussion is kind of what I talked about on here. You guys are very fortunate. You have a very good CEO. Not every town has that. But what I can say is, I don't know how often that Jeff deals with timber harvesting, whereas forest rangers deal with it every day, all day long. And like I said, they can walk out onto a site and be like, yep, And they have this little prism thing that they can look through, and like, yep, that's a violation, or they're in compliance. So that is why that has been put in place, to ease the burden on municipalities. Because let's be honest, say you catch a case and it appears that there's a violation, and the alleged violator is like, nope, I don't believe so. I want to go to court. Well, then all of a sudden, there's monies being spent out of a local budget to prosecute a case, whereas, again, the Maine Forest Service, they have access to that. So it's just something to consider in that specific situation. Most of the municipalities that I have seen have gone option one and let your CEO deal with just straight up vegetation removal within the shoreline that isn't timber harvesting. But there's a lot of towns that want to hold on to it. It's to each their own on that, but I always want to make that point that there's people out there that are professionals that deal with it all the time. And it's not easy. I've dealt with a few of them, and I'm glad I have the Forest Service to lean on.
So without respect to John's statement, without making any decisions, are there any questions just for our education about timber harvesting that anyone on the board has?
I understand what's being said, but
Okay.
yeah, I mean...
Sure. Then let's just, because we have the resource here and we're able to ask questions. Any yes?
I think it would be good to talk to Jeff and just see if we have any historical timber harvesting in the
Very
town.
little.
Or whether it's strictly limited to just the resource vegetation clearing. But I mean, if we don't have any, maybe that's not something we need to discuss.
It's a really good point. It's a really good point. And if there is not that much, then are you actually giving up that much by releasing control to the Forest Service?
Something to consider. Okay. Moving on, height of a structure, the definition, page 3, it's the funny tree, the funny word.
Right. And that really hasn't changed. It's just more well-defined. The principle has always been there. It's something that Jeff and I have done together down here before. It's just hopefully explained a little better.
Does anyone have any questions just about that proposed definition?
And I'll add to that. Add to that. Maybe you're getting at the height of the structure, not including cupolas and
Yes,
that kind of stuff.
the exemptions.
Gotcha.
Right.
Gotcha. Yep.
What about in a regular surface?
In a regular surface.
You've got the...
Oh, okay. So you're taking, when you're doing your measurement there, you're going median level before construction. So you're taking into account what the land was and measuring from there. And so that way you're not going all the way over to the low side, and you're not going all the way to the high side. You're taking that average, a median level.
Okay.
Our current restriction is 30 feet, but you mentioned 35. Is that because Boothbay Harbor has historically been more stringent than the state?
That may be correct. Yep, I believe that is so. Yep. Because it's been 35 for a while.
Were the town, the board, to consider changing that to 35, would this be an appropriate time to do that?
Sure. Yep.
Or to 25 or
wherever
any
you guys want to be.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
All right, so there's some latitude in that as well.
Yep.
Okay. The Shoreland Zone Great Pond, 30% expansion or cap, are there any questions that we can ask Colin about that? Or Jeff? Okay, great. What was the other one?
Non-vegetated exemptions?
Right.
Yeah, the rock outcroppings. Yep.
Right. Any further questions, information about non-vegetated exemptions? Okay. I can't speak for myself, or I can only speak for myself, but I'm getting a sense from the board that there's a desire to further ponder this and possibly table. So does that seem to be the will of the board? Then at this...
The selectmen's preference, though, is really a mandate to us. If warrants are to go forward, they have to meet the required timetable that would allow them to get to a meeting on July 1st, so that would suggest that our whatever deliberations would be accelerated accordingly.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, again, you guys can table this until your regular meeting next month, come.
Right,
have
but what I'm
this
saying
business.
is, we don't have 6 months or a year to get around.
You're not on an accelerated timeframe. You can
No, I didn't
forward
say
this on-
accelerated,
No, but you could
but-
forward this on to the selectmen really at any point. I'm correct with that, right, Bill? Yeah. So,
July 2nd?
you certainly, yeah, whenever you
If they
guys
want
are
to have, if
comfortable,
they want to
obviously, we're
have
not
the
rushing you
town
guys
meeting
to
on the
make
1st,
any
what I mean
decisions.
is that there is an implied deadline for us.
Oh, that was, no, that's just sort of when our next sort of year starts, on our municipal year. But that was just an arbitrary number.
Oh, I
throwing out that it
misunderstood
could be
Wendy's
July
comment.
1st. But it could be, you could table this and continue discussions for as long as it's necessary to get where
could
you
take a
want to
year
be.
and a half
And then
or 2
forward it
years.
on to the board of
Okay,
selectmen.
but the selectmen then, I misunderstood Wendy. The selectmen are not targeting a July 1 date if warrants are to go forward this year.
I don't believe so, Bill. Speaking for the board or.
Hey, I only matter for another week and a half. So,
I think not only are we going to be
I think there was a
deliberating,
desire,
but,
this is my
you know,
guess.
there's
My
going to be
guess is there was a desire to kind of move
considerable
this forward.
input.
Unless you put some deadlines to any topic, it kind of runs
Right.
on for forever. And so we'd like to get it done. Having said that, there is no hard and fast time frame. If you guys need to take longer to deliberate it, take longer. That's my opinion.
Is the initiative now with the planning board, or would the Board of Selectmen like to provide any guidance with respect to
I think the
timing or
initiative
preferences?
was the planning
With the
board.
planning board.
Okay. Then hearing that, I guess I'll entertain a motion to table any decisions until at least the next planning board meeting, where it can be further discussed and reviewed, and recommendations or questions put
Right.
forth.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second to that?
Second.
Is there any additional discussion on that motion? Very good. All in favor on that motion?
Aye.
Unopposed? Very good. Have any other questions or comments from our future planning board member?
No, I don't even live in Bouvet Harbor, but I have interest in Bouvet Harbor. I'm Southport. When is your next planning board meeting, is a simple question.
May 11th at 6.
Yeah. Our regular schedules are it's the second Wednesday of every month, as long as there's an application, and quite often, even when there isn't an application before the planning board, we will still choose to get together, so. Great. Hearing or seeing no other questions, board will entertain a motion to adjourn for the evening.
So moved.
Second.
Very good. All in favor? Great.